Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 6 of the PK's podcast. It is called What If? Redefining Success in Ministry. It's an interesting concept. If you've liked these podcasts so far, please be sure and like and subscribe and hit those notifications so that you know that there's a new episode that's coming out. Try to do these once a week. We also have the PK's tailgate that comes out periodically throughout the week. It's usually after I do my morning walk or my morning hike and just talk a little bit. So please join me for that. But let's get back to it. So what if redefining success in ministry? What if? So if you've been in ministry for a while, if you pastored a church, if you was a youth pastor, small group leader, whatever it is, we all grow up with ideas of what success looks like, even in ministry. We got big stages, we got full buildings, a certain title, get a paycheck, you get a platform. We see those that are on TV, we see, full stadiums, we see people with that really public ministry. And then we see people that, they're content with that small church where they're really meeting the people's needs and they're really pastoring and doing those things. See great evangelists. We see people that are getting out there and telling the world about things. I've been getting involved a little bit into digital missionary stuff. And, we see people from everywhere that's doing all kinds of different things. And so, but, my question is, but what happens when obedience takes you somewhere smaller or slower or quieter? It says in the Bible, it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord." What if those plans are to take you to a place that's smaller, take you to a place that, you know, you didn't know that you were supposed to be at? God doesn't just have a plan, he has his plan. We have our plans. We can plan all we want, but a lot of times, we make plans, but God changes those plans a lot of times. How many of you can relate to that? Make sure you put that in the comments for sure, because I know I've done it several times. God has changed my plans when I thought I was going one way and all of a sudden I'm going a total opposite way. It happened just here recently, in the position that I was at a church that was really, starting to grow and thriving and stuff. But God had different plans. You see, and that plan might look like a detour to you, but you know what? It's actually a divine setup. We talked in last week's podcast. We talked about how God takes us through storms and things like that to grow us. This is kind of the same thing. God will change those plans so that he can place us where he wants us to be. God is a strategic God. God knows what he wants for us. God knows where he wants to take us. He knows where he wants to place us and plant us. But what if the road to significance doesn't come with applause, but comes with obscurity? It may not be all glamorous and roses and all of that kind of stuff. It may be in a small church. It may be in a small town. It may be starting something just fresh and new. Kind of like what I'm doing right now. I'm starting something fresh and starting something new. If you've been watching all the podcasts and following me on Facebook and Instagram and all that, some of the story, of where I was and where I came from and what has happened throughout my life. My testimony isn't just something that, I was raised in a pastor's home, and oh yeah, you raised in a pastor's home, then you take over for your dad and you do this ministry. No, mine wasn't like that at all. I did take over for my dad at one church eventually, but eventually my PTSD and everything else caught up with me, and I wound up resigning that position because of those kind of things, and then I got out of ministry for a long time. And then, I was just helping out in churches. I wasn't a pastor. I wasn't a youth pastor. I wasn't anything really. I was just helping out, and doing those kind of things. And it wasn't until just a year ago or a little over a year ago that, I started really getting involved in a church and really doing things and had the title of executive pastor / lead pastor, if you want to call it that. But, there was some things that happened and things that transpired that I had to leave that position. Did I leave my calling? No, I left that position. You see, I had plans. I had plans to stay there and continue doing what I was doing, but God had other plans. God has other things. It's like, not I stopped that and I started this podcast and started doing some other things. And now, on Sunday night or here in a few days, I'm going to be leaving and going to Vietnam. When this podcast comes out, I'll be in Vietnam. So, you know, be sure and watch the episodes that follow, because there's some great things are going to happen. We're going to be training 360 something pastors, teaching them how to preach and teach and how to be a pastor, and it's a cool thing because when God changes your plans, he begins to set you up for greater things and set you up for things that are bigger than what you could even imagine. Yeah, they may be small at first, but you know what? If God is in it, God is going to do some awesome things. So let me ask you this. Have you ever felt like you were stepping backward when you thought you were called to move forward? I mean, I have. I definitely have. This was one of the places where I thought I was. Thought I was stepping backwards. Um, but God is positioning my life and my family's lives and our ministries into a different avenue. And my next question is, have you ever obeyed God and it looked like everything got smaller? Yeah. I never had a big ministry. I never had a big church, never had, big things or big congregations, Um, but when you have something and you leave and have nothing, it definitely gets smaller. So maybe it wasn't failure, maybe it was just faith. Maybe it was faith. And then I had this what if moment. What if? I remember walking away from what most people would call a successful ministry because in the last year and a half, it was pretty successful. The church was seeing growth, and there were things that I had helped to implement that helped with that growth. I had a title, I had the stage, I had a platform, I had influence, but deep down, I knew God was shifting me. Even before the things that happened to me, I knew that, probably a month before that things were starting to shift a little bit, and that shift didn't make sense on paper. It didn't check all my boxes and it didn't impress anybody else because people were, I tell people a little bit about what was going on. And they're like, yeah, yeah, you're not going anywhere. You're not this and that, and I was like, okay, but for me though, it brought peace. So when I did walk away, there was this peace. There was this peace that was in my heart. I spent a whole week of prayer and fasting and talking to other pastors and mentors and leaders about my decision and stuff. And in Romans 8:28 it says all things work together for the good of those who love God. I mean, that's what it's about, you know? And can I be honest? That good didn't look glamorous. Sometimes it looked like being misunderstood. Yeah, and I thought, there's a lot of people that still are wondering, why did you just walk away? And I didn't just walk away because sometimes it looks like rebuilding from scratch. Sometimes it looks like sitting in silence with God and saying, okay, God, now what? And I've done that, you know, I've done that. But at the time, my life was positioned for growth, for spiritual growth, for God to do things in my life. My life was positioned for that. You see, but over time I've seen it. He was never wasting my obedience. He was refining my definition of success. We can look at all the numbers and we can look and see, what the giving or the offering and, how many people are coming to your church, how many people are doing this and that. But the thing is, how many lives are being changed? How many lives are being transformed for the good of God and to God? How many lives? We talk about, leaving the 99 for the one, but most of the time we're chasing after the 99 and trying to keep other people coming and joining us at church and all of that. Instead of just remembering the names of the people, everybody just has a number. And that's not a good place to be in if you're a pastor, if you're a minister, or if you're any of those things, because it's not about that. It's about souls. It's about winning people to Christ. And so the next part of this is, embracing the unknown. A lot of things that I'm doing now, it's a lot of unknowns. I'm learning how to record. I'm learning how to set up different cameras. I'm learning how to, do audio. I'm learning how to post things on social media. I'm learning and I'm learning and I'm learning. What if can be a paralyzing question, or it can be a launching pad. Catch that? Because what if can be a paralyzing question, or it can be a launching pad. Here's 3 questions. What if this is what we ask, and we begin to go through these things in our mind, what if I leave? What it's not going to be comfortable. What if I leave what's comfortable? What if the numbers go down? What if people don't understand? I faced all those. I faced every single one of them. But here's a better question to ask yourself. What if God meets me there? What if God meets me there? What if that quiet place becomes the most fruitful season of my life? What if letting go of my plan makes room for His? I'm telling you, those 3 questions, yes, it's scary. What's not scary? Life can be scary at times. It can. But what if letting go of my plans makes room for His plans? Are my plans more important? It's like getting in a car and asking Jesus, "Hey Jesus, we're going to go to McDonald's today." And then He says, "Nah, I don't want to go to McDonald's." Are we going to just keep pushing and saying, "No, we're going to McDonald's"? No, we're going to do what Jesus wants to do. And yeah, letting go is scary. But clinging to something God never asked you to carry, that's even scarier. That's like being in an airplane and flying along, and all of a sudden there's no pilot. We're clinging to the fact that there's a pilot in the cockpit, but then all of a sudden now we're crashing and there's no pilot. It's like not having God around. So, but clinging to something God never asked you to carry, that's scarier. God didn't ask you to carry the church. God didn't ask you to carry this person, that person, and this and this and this. God asked you to follow His plan. So I want to challenge you today. What have you equated with success that God never promised you? Are you willing to release it? There's people that aren't willing to release it. There's huge ministries that are out there that the pastor's not willing to release it. I'm telling you, there's ministries where the leader doesn't want to release it because it's grown, and that's what they consider success. But what if God said, that's not success? Having these people and having all this money and cash and whatever. Did God promise you that? Was that the kind of success that God promised you? Are you willing to release it? Success isn't about being seen. It's about being surrendered. being surrendered totally to Christ. And sometimes the greatest move of faith is walking away from what looks successful to step into what's truly significant. The greatest move of faith is walking away from what looks successful to step into what's truly significant. Is what you've built more significant than what God is going to build through you? What if? Maybe your what if moment is right in front of you. Man, what if you said yes? What if you trusted the unknown? What if you found joy in the middle of obedience, even when no one else sees it? I could have told my friend Winston, no, I don't want to go to Vietnam. And he asked me, he's asked me 2 or 3 times. What if? I get the opportunity to preach 2 messages to over 300 pastors and leaders in Vietnam. I'm humbled by that. I'm excited by that. But the significance of that is what God wants me to do. It's where God has started taking me to. Yeah, it's scary. Yeah, it's new. Yeah, it's different. But I'm telling you, when you're on God's path, when you're doing what God truly wants you to do, you're going to walk in peace. You're going to walk in contentment, and you're going to walk in significance because He's going to bless it. So today, thanks for joining me on this podcast. Hopefully you've been challenged, you've been encouraged, but I need you to send somebody else that's walking through ministry, a ministry pivot, that's trying to decide. Send them this YouTube video. But thanks for joining me in this. This next episode is going to be, we're going to start digging into the marriage and ministry and the myth of the power couple. You're married and you're in ministry, and your wife or maybe your spouse, whatever it is, maybe they're like, you're the one that's called to ministry. You're the one that's called to be here. But I'm not. And they feel that pressure and that expectation and all of that. So make sure you tune in for the next episode. It's going to be good. Just like, subscribe, and all that. But remember, you're not crazy and you're not alone. And we're in this together, because I couldn't do this without you guys. And yeah, thanks for listening. I will see you guys in the next episode. Thanks a lot.